Welcome to the Purpose Focused Advisor. This show is for financial advisors who want to grow their business with clarity, lead with purpose, and build a life that reflects what matters most.
Welcome back to the Purpose Focused Advisor. Rob Brown here, along with my esteemed guest, David Bahnsen. David, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Great to be with you.
David, before we dive in, I want to say this so everybody can hear. I said this to you before we got started. I think your book, Full-Time, Work and the Meaning of Life, is one of the most important books I've read in the last 20 years. And I've read a lot of books, not all the ones on the bookshelf behind me, but I've read a lot of books. It is really an important book for a lot of people. I can't think of anybody who wouldn't benefit from it, but in particular, because this podcast is for financial advisors, I think this is a must-read, whether you are a person of faith or not. There are just so many important lessons around the importance of purpose and what purpose really means, both in the work that we do as advisors, but also in helping our clients understand what purpose is all about so that they can really live purposeful lives. And I just want to say that to get started, because I think it's really an honor to have you on the podcast.
Well, look, I very much appreciate it. It's very kind of you. It is a book that I am very grateful for, in the sense that there's been a good response to it. There are a lot of folks of different generations and different stages of life. So the book could speak to people in different ways. You know, the message to somebody in later stages of life is different than a Gen Xer like myself who's middle-aged, and different than to a younger person. But it's a message that I'm very passionate about, care about a lot. I always thought I would write it later in life, and I'm grateful that God sort of opened the door for me to write it when I did, and hopefully it'll have an impact in one way or another.
Yeah, I feel it will. I feel it's a book that will last. It'll stand the test of time. It's one that you need to read and then go back to. I told you I listened to it on Audible, but I'm really excited because I picked up the paperback version, and there's a bonus chapter. So I get some more Bahnsen later when I get a chance to pick it up and finish the book that way. But David, let's talk about purpose. How do you define purpose?
Well, let me start with, I was raised as a believer and what we call catechized. I was raised with the catechism to kind of teach me the tenets of the Christian faith. And the first question in the Westminster Confession is, what is man's chief end? Which is a way of saying, what is man's purpose, is what you're asking me. And the answer is, man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And so I believe that at a high level, macro, universally, not now targeting into a particular person, particular context, particular era of history or vocation or challenges or historical moment, but at a high level, the universal purpose of mankind is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. And I think that's an unimprovable answer. It captures our need to bring glory to our Creator, which is what we were created for, and that is encompassed obedience and trust. We are to trust and obey God. We glorify Him. And it also, as we know from even like 1 Corinthians 10:31, whether you eat or drink, do all to the glory of God. Meaning it's not just in the big things that we might do, our marriages, our careers, but everything, day to day, the way in which we run a race, we run to win, the way in which we eat or drink, as Paul said. But then it doesn't end it with this idea that sort of speaks to our duty to God, glorifying Him, obeying Him, but the enjoying Him forever. There's this sort of gift, there's this joy, there's this receipt that comes in our purpose. And so when you meet somebody who is in the doldrums, who is laying on the couch all the time, who is not participating in this adventure of life. I argue that they are all at once failing to live out to the purpose, but in the way in which they're doing so is not merely that they're failing to glorify God. You don't glorify God as a couch potato, but you're failing to enjoy God. God created a world as a venue for adventure, for dreams, for living out our God-given skills. This is our purpose. And so I think it is a positive and affirmative message that involves us being created for the purpose of glorifying and enjoying God.
I think that's a great answer. And it is the answer. And in your book, you take that a big step forward in attaching that purpose to work.
Right.
And that is not just something that we can do or could do. It's something that we should do if we are serious about honoring God as our creator who created us to work. And you use a term, or you mention the word Avodah, the Hebrew word Avodah, in the book as it relates to work, and tell us and teach us that word can be translated as work, as service, but also as worship. And I love that attachment. So can you take that description of purpose and that concept of Avodah and kind of dive into why work is meant to be part of the purpose that we serve?
Yeah, so this is a great segue in terms of putting more meat on the bone about the way I answered your initial question. I think my answer, I would stand it up as the high-level macro answer.
Sure.
And then the subtitle of my book, so my book is called Full-Time Work and the Meaning of Life. And it is very much trying to explicitly say that work is the meaning of life. And I actually had somebody who obviously was also catechized and a little more theologically trained at a Q&A at one of my speeches on the book say, well, how can you say work's the meaning of life? Because we were taught that our chief end is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And I said, that's what I just said. In other words, we have to answer the question, what does this mean? Francis Schaeffer famously asked in the 1970s, how should we then live? We can lay out some of the tenets of what we believe. What does it mean? And what I suggest in the book is what it means is Avodah, that God made us. We have to look to what God Himself said about why He made us. And what He said in Genesis 1, which is before sin entered the world, in the very creation account, He made us in His image and likeness, to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, to have dominion over the world, to care for the world, to cultivate the creation. It goes on to talk about the first task being to name the animals. There was a creative function. There was ordering and structuring of this creation God had made. And I believe all of these things are synonymous with the four-letter word work. And yet, the reality is that many people see work as a byproduct of sin, of the curse. But Exodus 20 in the fourth commandment, most people know, the commandments, you shall not murder, shall not steal. Fourth commandment, thou shalt, 6 days shalt thou work and do all thy labor. Okay, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. The word used in Hebrew was avodah, same word used in Genesis 2, along with shamar, another Hebrew word, Genesis 2, chapter 15, for caring for the garden and the work that they would do in the garden. That avo, the Hebrew prefix, is used hundreds of times in the Hebraic scriptures for worship. But it's the literal word, grammatically, explicitly used for work, for vocational work. And I also love another usage in the Old Testament, Joshua 24, verse 15. Remember this day whom you shall serve. That's the word Avodah. So I think that, yes, you get a really beautiful scriptural context out of the word Avodah for what our purpose is. That we are, yes, to worship God, but our worship is itself our work, and that there is service in the work. And these things are all captured, not just theologically, but literally in the actual interpretation of the text.
Yeah. And, one of the things that you talk about in the book is it relates, as you dive even deeper into that discussion around work and worship, is the fact that so often today work is thought of as being a bad thing. You use some different variations of what, like, for example, the word workaholic might mean. Something off the top that sounds bad, but you suggest, well, maybe if you use it the correct way, or the way that you would like to use it, that there's a different way to think about that. Dig into that a little bit and relate that to maybe what you see in the work that financial advisors do, the important work that financial advisors do in the lives of their clients.
Well, it's funny. There's a lot of ability for us to use the English language and use vocabulary to some sort of manipulative effect. And manipulation sounds like a negative thing. Sometimes it's part of rhetoric. We're using words to try to animate a certain cause and pivot one way or the other. In other words, we don't just use words to formulate an argument. Sometimes we use words to kind of cheat the argument a little bit, right? And workaholic is obviously a made up word, but it is clearly done to poison the well a little bit. Everybody's familiar with the concept of alcoholic. It's a very negative thing. It's abusive. It's addictive. It's problematic. It has a social, antisocial context and even a medical and emotional and spiritual malady. And by trying to take the suffix of holic and put work in front of it, they're clearly trying to blend it together and conjure up the same level of negativity. Now, if what one means is someone is idolizing their work, well, I'm against it, but I'm against idolizing anything, as is the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And I do not believe that the only substitute or counterfeit God out there is work. There are hundreds of them, people, and yet we don't call things babyholic or spouseaholic, or of all of the different things that could very well become an idol. Workaholic is effectively coined for the purpose of making people be ashamed of working too hard. And the notion that one would be very committed to their work, that they would think about their work a lot, that they would be passionate about success and achievement, that they do not turn off a light switch and all of a sudden become agnostic to what's happening in their professional life. And yet at the same time, they're still present for their family. They're still a committed member of their church or a part of their community. That we would have a life that involves different spheres is not rocket science. In fact, every human being has more or less done it for thousands of years. But now we are attempting to isolate one thing as the issue that becomes somewhat poisonous to have a passionate commitment to, and that's work. And so I push back on that phraseology amongst other things as well. I have a chapter against the whole concept of work-life balance. So there's other areas too where I see this sort of well poisoning going on. My intent is not to defend people that work every waking moment to the peril of their family. And I go out of my way in the book to make abundantly clear. I've worked an awful lot of hours throughout my adult career. I still somehow go home to a wife who's stayed with me now for 24 years, and we somehow have raised 3 children. And, there is a lot of other things in my life aside from my work, but I'm not ashamed to say that the work has been a vital part of my adult life. And I'm sure many people could look at my work habits and say workaholic, but I would wear it with a badge of honor.
Yeah, I love that, because I think there's this tendency, especially in kind of the craze to figure out how to get more done in less time, to equate that with to create time to do other things, because other things, golf or tennis or whatever your hobbies are more important than the work. And I love the fact that you make that very clear, that yes, you can have systems, you can have ways that you can be more efficient in your work, so that you don't become workaholic, the bad version. But it has to be an intentional process.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And I would point out, by the way, that there's a sort of secular and worldly issue here when people will say we're working for the weekend, right? When people talk about how much they love their habits and their golfing or whatnot. I'm for all of these things that we would refer to in the category of either recreation or leisure. I love college football, and during football season to have a Saturday afternoon where I go up to the Coliseum and watch a USC game. I enjoy it as much as anyone could enjoy extracurricular activity. But here's the thing. Our work is not for the purpose of recreation. That's what the world has said. Everybody's working for the weekend, which is really it's almost sort of hedonistic. They're talking about partying, right? But don't so many in the church do something very similar? It may not be working to party on the weekend, but we say we work for the purpose of providing for our family. We come up with a different transactional message, working so we can support our church. I work so I can give to kingdom causes. So both, in that sense, are doing something, I think, very unhealthy. The world is telling us work is something we do so we can go have fun. The church is saying work is something we can do so we can do other things that are more important to God. And both messages are wrong. The fact of the matter is we do leisure and rest and recreation so we can work. We recharge our batteries one day with Sabbath rest so we can work for 6. We have the cause and effect totally backwards. So take a vacation, go to a ball game, go golf with your friends, go out to dinner with your wife, all of those things. But they're not the purpose, they're not the end of the work. They're all things that feed this virtuous cycle of a good life.
Yeah, so build on that. Because you were also attaching that to the message that can come from the pulpit around the evil of work, but at the same time, make sure you keep doing it and making a lot of money so that some of that money can come back to the church or go back to, as you call it, kingdom causes. And that's backwards too.
Yeah, so we start with, I happen to have had, my late father was a Christian intellectual and a very renowned theologian. And so sometimes I wax and wane a little more theological than some may want me to. But the church's error there is not only the kind of hypocrisy of it to some degree, or the conflict of interest, some myopia, short-sightedness at play, but there's a theological problem that when you say, the work is something we do so we can support kingdom causes, it dramatically misses the point that our work is a kingdom cause. That there are not two kingdoms at play. Those things we do here on earth and then the heavenly things or the sacred things. So we refer to it as a sacred secular distinction. And a big, I think, kind of lesson out of the Reformation was that we do not believe in this distinction, that God cares what the minister does, but doesn't care what the cobbler or tailor does. Martin Luther told us that God cared about making the shoes as much as he cared about the message from the sermon. And I think that this is back to my Genesis 1 point of what God made us for, that we are here to take the potential of his creation. He gave us a raw material. He basically gave us paint and canvas. and he asked us to go paint a picture. And that painting of a picture with our lives is work. That painting of a picture was polluted by sin, corrupted by the fall, but then part of the redemption story. So we're doing redemptive work because of sin. But in this redemption, we want to restore, God is restoring the world to the world he intended. That's what the whole point of the gospel is. And the world he intended is one in which he made us as co-creators with him. We're building things, we're producing things, we're creating things. And mankind is incapable of creating out of nothing. Only God can do that. But mankind is abundantly capable of creating out of the materials of the earth, out of the creation that God provided. And so we sit here every day utilizing things that mankind has created. And we have nice buildings and nice infrastructure in our civilization. We utilize technology. We have harnessed agriculture. We have created a supply chain, interdependent economic sophistication, all for the purpose of what? Enhancing our quality of life, building, creating, producing. And that notion that these things happen by accident is silly. They've happened as a byproduct of our created purpose. And I believe that we need to understand and be intentional about it, be intentional in living out that purpose.
And you extend that point further in the book when you talk about the trap or of the 30-year retirement, or the 30-year vacation, as you call it, as if stopping work so that you can have 30 years of rest and relaxation is the payoff for doing the work. And I think being in the financial services industry, an industry that has, an abundance of conversations or commercials or messages around, what's your number, with the idea of how quick can you get to a place where you don't have to work. There's almost conflict there. I like to dig into that. And how do you square that up? Because I'm sure that you have clients who enjoy the fruits of their labor, and you encourage them to.
Absolutely.
But I have a feeling that the conversation is a little bit different with you when you talk about that life maybe after that career, or the freedom of what they're able to do with their time.
So yeah, it kind of comes up in two different ways. One is much more significant than the other, which is the one you're bringing it up, is how we talk about this term retirement, the concept retirement. Secondly, it's adjacent to it, but we have a lot of clients that are business owners, and many people in financial services have worked with business owners. And we want to have the conversation around liquidity events too, because there's different aspects of selling a business or not selling a business, and what kind of goes into some of that around purpose, around succession, around legacy. But just the basic concept of retirement. The first thing I do in the book is acknowledge the history of this. Why is this a reasonably modern convention? The very phraseology, retirement. Why did the financial services profession that you and I are both a part of market this term? Well, the number one reason is because they could. It didn't exist for thousands of years because people died. This is a new phenomena that we have the mortality to even make something like this possible, that your life could end on a 20, 25, or 30-year vacation. And B, we have the prosperity. It was unheard of for most of human history, for all but a very teeny tiny sliver of the population, that one would have this sort of timeline combined with the resources for it to even be fathomable. So this is why the baby boomers are so unique, is that they entered the workforce. They were born from 1946 to 1964. And from the time they were born to the time they became young adults, life expectancy went up almost 10 years. Then they entered the workforce, and in the next 30 years, life expectancy went up almost another 10 years. So more or less, from the time they were born to the time they were now at this age, life expectancy went for a man from about age 60 to about age 78, for a woman a little older. And so you added 20 years to mortality. And in that period of time, real GDP growth from World War II to the financial crisis was 3.13% per year, net of inflation. So you added tens of trillions of dollars of goods and services and economic wealth to society. Then of course, there were products that were going to be tailored around this reality: IRAs, 401ks, pensions, various financial products that helped create some tax efficiency and other planning around this idea. Okay, well, that's all well and good, but then Madison Avenue ran with it. And that, you talk about what's your number. I go through some of the more famous commercials and print ads and themes that we've seen in financial services over the years. And not all of them are brand new. Some of this goes back to 60s and 70s with the insurance companies. And there's this sort of imagery of somebody checking out, going to the golf course, going to the yacht. It is the marketing that financial services is guilty of, but it's also the marketing they've used for retirement communities, the villages in Florida. Just this idea of you're on vacation, it looks like a resort, but it's going to be the rest of your life. And some of it has ended up becoming kind of fodder to be mocked a little bit. The commercial about the guy who wants to buy a vineyard and like, why do I want a vineyard, and these silly things. But all of it does put at least imagery of somebody checking out. Okay, I don't think we can change the word retirement out of the kind of day-to-day vernacular of American society. But what I do is go as much as I can out of my way to define retirement as a financial term. That is a state of independence, a state of financial freedom, not a state of being checked out from useful and productive activity. So, I myself have been very financially independent for quite some time. I work harder now than I ever have. I have a lot of clients that their vision is to be done and they want to check out, and other clients that are also very financially independent but still engaged. But I want to be able to have a conversation that doesn't presuppose the goal of everybody's working life is to stop working. That's the presupposition that bothers me the most, that the purpose of work is to not do it anymore. It's embedded in most cash flow modeling tools. It's embedded in the commercial language, the what's your number, the idea that what you're supposed to do is accumulate a lump sum and then be done. And having the ability to have freedom, that you could turn down the knob a bit at different age and stage. There are certain people that just physically, if you were a cop out chasing bad guys in your 30s, you're not going to be working the gang unit, and when you're 74. So there's going to be differences in what it looks like, but that's the fun part of a conversation between an advisor and a client. What are consulting opportunities available? What is some part-time work? What is some mentoring? What are board activities? There's a lot of different things, and it's going to be different in different lines of work, but all of our clients are from different lines of work. So there's a customization in the advice that is given. Look, are there some clients out there that are just, you know what, David, I love the way you manage money, but I don't agree with you on any of this. I'm done. I want to go golf and vacation, and I'm done with everything, and you need to make sure I have the financial resources to do so. Maybe not every client's going to buy into my worldview on this, but I, at least for my part, want to present it in what I think is a more faithful way and a more holistic way. And by the way, more client-friendly way. Because I think a lot of clients, their purpose, their dignity, their usefulness, their identity was tied up in a lot of what they did throughout their life for good reason, because they were good at it. And then all of a sudden they think they're checked out, they got the golden watch and they're done. It oftentimes doesn't go the way they think it will.
Yeah. No, I love that, because it's about having the conversation. Again, as you said, they don't have to agree with your worldview. But if you have that conversation, you know that you have given your best to help them really think through what they really want. Because I think that's sometimes missing in the conversation. Is a financial advisor, it's easy to plug in. You want to make sure that your kids have, X number of dollars in their trust accounts when you're gone, is a way to perpetuate that wealth. But that may not really be what it is they actually want if they stop to think about that and all of the implications that come around that. So, David, go ahead. I'm sorry. It sounds like...
I know. I agree with you so much. And it really does get to the depth of relationship an advisor wants to have with a client. And also accepting that not every client relationship will be the exact same. But there's different levels of intimacy that we build over time. There's different levels of trust. And so there's certain conversations that will be more appropriate with some clients than others. But I think you're exactly right. Having that about the kids, about the grandkids, about their vision and inheritance, that's all part and parcel of the same thing, is you can deliver a cash flow model and you can deliver a portfolio that's supposed to accommodate it. But if you don't deliver an in-depth conversation about these deeper questions that involve purpose, goals, vision, values, I'm not sure that we're doing our full job.
Yeah. And I hear advisors sometimes say that they're having trouble getting their clients to come into their offices or to go see their clients for their regular reviews because the clients have kind of checked out and think of it a little bit like going to the dentist. It also seems to me that having this kind of conversation turns that meeting, that regular meeting that you have with your advisor, into something that you look forward to because you truly are exploring what your life is going to be about.
I totally agree. The fact of the matter is that there's certain elements of our business that we want to be like the dentist. You want a regiment, you want processes, you want scale, you want professionalism. There's a certain part of it that you want to be like a professional service provider. But then there's other elements that need to be very different because you know what? People can change their dentist without really even having to think about it. And it's not a big deal to just get a new dentist. You don't want the advisor relationship to be so commoditized. You want there to be a different level of depth, as you say, maybe even an excitement. They get excited to come here and to bounce ideas off and to have that sort of conversation. Your dentist by definition can't listen to you much because you usually got stuff in your mouth. But the advisor.
But they still really ask questions. That drives me crazy.
Yeah. Even all numbed up and Novocaine. So. But you're supposed to be a listener. And a client-advisor relationship lends itself to that.
Yeah, that's great. So, David, it's almost time to land the plane. But I want to close by asking you one last question. And I should have maybe mentioned this at the top. You're a Barron's top 100 advisor. I think I read that your firm manages over $7 billion. Following you on LinkedIn for the last couple of months, I've noticed you've been opening offices in different parts of the country. So you are having a lot of success in this industry. How do you square that success up against your purpose and keep it from being something that overwhelms you or gives you a big head?
Well, I believe that success is not what gives someone a big head, but worshiping or overly focusing on the praise of mankind or the material benefits or whatnot. In other words, these things are symptomatic of a deeper issue when they come up. For us, we are very purpose-driven. We are a very missional organization. We have something extraordinarily missional about what we're trying to do every day. And it is true that when you do it really well in this business, there are certain quantifiable metrics that come front and center. You get more assets under management, you get more revenue, We grow and we have to open more offices, hire more people. So that comes with some data metric attached to it that can feel like a trophy. We're a little over $7.5 billion in assets, and we grow organically about 30% a year. All of our growth is outside of M&A and anything like that. And those are not the metrics that make me feel good when I put my head on my pillow. I want to feel good about the quality of the experience we're delivering to clients. So the way we address it and hedge against that potential risk is we obsessively focus on the quality of the experience we're delivering clients. And there, when you're doing a good job, because you're going to be your own worst critic. Did you fail to properly create a solution? Did you fail to properly probe and assess and have a deeper conversation? That qualitative element drives us. And that's the best hedge, I think, against it. In the meantime, we're not ashamed of the quantifiable successes, but they're not enough. First of all, it's somewhat insatiable. There was a time where I thought, if I could ever be $1 million producer, I'll have achieved everything I want to achieve. And, that was $50 million of annual revenue ago. Now we're over 50 million of revenue, and I'm thinking about the next goals. But they're goals that are driven around our mission, not around a trophy and not around, another, the Barron's honor and those type of things. Those things are all great. They're fine. But most of us have been in the business long enough to know that there's something incredibly meaningful about sustained client relationships, delivering solutions that you get to see the value it represented, that you helped clients avoid a particular mess. Those things are so much more meaningful than any of the metrics or quantifiable elements. That's what continues to drive us day by day.
Yeah, I love that because, as I work with advisors, one of the things that I run into a lot, and maybe it's even one of the reasons that they're looking for somebody like me, is they get to a point where the numbers are just the numbers. I got, named to the Forbes list for the 12th year in a row. Who cares? It was cool the first year. I love seeing, putting Forbes in the signature line on my email messages, but it stops meaning something. And what you're saying and what I try to encourage is put the purpose into what you're doing first and then do it. And then the success and the other things will follow and you can enjoy them. But you're enjoying them because you're accomplishing that purpose, that, as you call it, that missional thing that you have set out to do. So I just love that message. I think that's a great way to finish up our conversation. But I do have to ask you, is there something that we missed? Is there something that maybe we should have talked about that we didn't, that you'd like to share here in the last minute or so?
Well, I think that you've asked some wonderful questions, and I hope that some of the answers I've given have been useful to the listeners. I really love the financial advisory profession, and the message of full time was meant to be for any industry, any sector, any worker, any age and stage of life. But there is a special component of this for those of us in the advisory profession, because there's leverage. Not only do we get to apply it to our own lives, but we might be in a position to apply it to the lives of others that trust us for our advice. And so that's a real nice connection of this message and then what we do for a living.
Yeah, I think the message of the book is one that will make you a better advisor. Yeah. And in being a better advisor, that means that you'll be a better advisor to your clients, and they will have better lives. Yeah. So I want to tell everybody, go out and get the book. It is a great listen and a great read. David, I don't know if there's any place in particular you want to send people to learn more about you and the book?
Well, the book, I would say fulltimebook.com. Okay. Fulltimebook.com gives them a place they can see reviews and they can read little excerpts and video clips and things like that. And then if people are interested in learning more about me and my business, dividendcafe.com is our investment writing commentary. There's all kinds of content things we do there. we're heavy creators of content, have a point of view, a lot of videos, podcasts, investment writing that we do ourselves. It's all authentic from me. And that's the easiest web address to give to let people stay in touch is dividendcafe.com.
Gotcha. And I may have this wrong, but you write Bahnsen on business?
It's B2 Bahnsen. So the letter B, the number 2, B2 Bahnsen is our Substack, is a Substack I do that I've really enjoyed doing. I think I've done 7 or 8 posts now, and am just trying to provide a little free set of ideas as I get inspired once a week, once every other week, of just, issues in the advisory profession are important to me. So yeah, for a kind of B2B connection, B2 Bahnsen is my Substack that I'm really enjoying doing, and it allows me to stay in touch with other advisors. There's about 1,100 advisors around the country that have subscribed already. Just started it a couple months ago. And again, I will say this. All I can do is share what's worked well for me, what's worked well for my business. I don't believe my advice is universally normative, but to the extent it helps some people hear some things, I hope it can be a good tool.
Yeah. Well, you know how when you buy a red car, you see a lot of red cars?
Yeah.
Now that once I heard your interview on Mike Rowe on the way I heard it, it's like I've seen you everywhere. And I've enjoyed it. And I ran into B2 Bahnsen. I have particularly enjoyed reading your Substack articles because those speak to some of the, let's call them everyday advisor issues and some of the things you've learned as an advisor in particular. So we'll make sure we include all of that in the show notes.
Well, I appreciate that.
David, thank you so much for being here. To our audience, thanks for listening in. Please don't forget to go follow us on Apple and like and star us and all that kind of stuff. But most importantly, remember, we're rooting for your success. Have a great week.
Thanks for listening to The Purpose Focused Advisor. If today's episode gave you something to think about or a step you're ready to take, head over to truestfancoaching.com. There you'll find tools, resources, and ways we can work together to help you lead with purpose and build the business and life you were meant for. If you enjoyed the show, we'd be grateful if you take a moment to rate and review it. It helps more advisors find their way here.